The year was 1788, and in a small village outside Paris, a teenage peasant girl was about to make a single, seemingly innocent decision that would topple kings, destroy an empire, and reshape the entire world. What you're about to hear is the story history never taught you, the true origin of the French Revolution, and how one girl's desperate attempt to save her family accidentally triggered the bloodiest uprising in European history. Her name was Marie Claire Dubois, and most people have never heard of her because the authorities spent centuries trying to erase her from the historical record. But the truth about what she did, and why it mattered, reveals a side of the French Revolution that would shock even the most knowledgeable historians. Picture France in the final years of the old regime, a kingdom teetering on the edge of financial collapse, where nobles lived in unimaginable luxury while peasants starved in mud-floored hovels. The contrast was so extreme that it defied belief. In the Palace of Versailles, courtiers spent more money on a single dinner party than most farmers earned in their entire lifetimes. Meanwhile, in villages across France, children were dying of hunger, while their parents worked 18-hour days just to pay taxes to the very people who were bankrupting the nation. Marie Claire lived in one of these forgotten villages, a place called Saint-Étienne-du-Bois, where life hadn't changed meaningfully for hundreds of years. Her family were tenant farmers, working land they would never own for a lord they rarely saw. Like most peasants, they lived in constant fear of the tax collectors, church officials, and local magistrates who seemed to exist solely to extract every possible coin from people who had almost nothing to give. But Marie Claire was different from the other peasants in her village. She could read, a skill her grandmother had secretly taught her using an old prayer book hidden in their cottage. In a world where literacy was largely restricted to the nobility and clergy, this made her dangerous because she could understand the legal documents that the authorities used to justify their endless demands for money. And what she discovered in those documents would change everything. The crisis began in the summer of 1788, when the local tax collector arrived in Saint-Étienne-du-Bois with demands that exceeded anything the villagers had ever seen. The amount wasn't just unreasonable, it was impossible. The peasants were being asked to pay more in taxes than their farms could produce in an entire year. It was essentially a death sentence disguised as a legal obligation. Most of the villagers responded the way peasants had always responded to impossible demands. They begged, they pleaded, they offered to pay what they could and hoped for mercy. But Marie Claire did something different. She asked to see the legal justification for the tax. And when the collector produced his official documents, she did something that no peasant had ever dared to do. She read them carefully and discovered they were forgeries. The tax collector wasn't acting on behalf of the king or any legitimate authority. He was running an elaborate fraud, using fake documents to steal money from peasants who couldn't read well enough to recognize the deception. It was a scam that had probably been operating for years, maybe decades, enriching corrupt officials while pushing rural communities to the brink of starvation. When Marie Claire confronted the collector with evidence of his fraud, his response revealed just how widespread the corruption had become. He laughed, openly admitting that half the tax collected in rural France were unauthorized, that local officials had been inventing new fees and obligations for years, secure in the knowledge that illiterate peasants had no way to challenge them. The entire system of rural taxation had become a criminal enterprise masquerading as legitimate government. But Marie Claire made a decision that would echo through history. Instead of accepting this revelation and trying to negotiate a private solution for her village, she decided to expose the entire conspiracy. She began traveling to other communities, teaching peasants how to recognize forged documents, showing them that many of the taxes they had been paying for years were completely illegal. Word of her discoveries spread like wildfire through the countryside. What Marie Claire had accidentally uncovered was far more than simple tax fraud. She had revealed that the entire relationship between the French government and its rural population was built on systematic deception. Peasants who had been told they were fulfilling their sacred duty to king and country discovered they were actually being robbed by criminals with official seals. The psychological impact of this revelation was devastating. Within months, her message had reached hundreds of villages across northern France. Peasant communities that had never communicated with each other suddenly found themselves united by a common understanding. They had all been victims of the same massive fraud. The anger that resulted wasn't just about money. It was about the fundamental betrayal of trust that lay at the heart of French society. But the real explosion came when Marie Claire's discoveries reached the educated middle class in Paris. Lawyers, merchants, and intellectuals who had long suspected corruption in the royal administration suddenly had concrete proof of systematic fraud on a massive scale. The evidence Marie Claire provided gave them the ammunition they needed to launch attacks on the entire structure of royal government. The authorities' response to these revelations was swift and brutal. Marie Claire was arrested on charges of sedition and conspiracy. Her family was evicted from their farm, and several peasants who had supported her were imprisoned, or worse. But it was too late. The knowledge of widespread fraud had spread too far to be contained, and the anger it generated could no longer be controlled. The connection between Marie Claire's discoveries and the events that followed has been deliberately obscured by historians, but the evidence is there for those who know where to look. The peasant uprisings that began in 1789, the urban riots that forced the calling of the Estates General, even the storming of the Bastille, all can be traced back to the fury generated by the revelation that the French government had been systematically robbing its own people for decades. When the revolutionaries spoke of the corruption of the old regime, when they demanded accountability from royal officials, when they insisted that taxation required representation, they were building on foundations laid by a teenage peasant girl who had dared to read the documents that were supposed to keep her enslaved. Marie Claire Dubois had accidentally provided the spark that would ignite a revolution. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the story is what happened to Marie Claire herself. After her arrest, she simply vanished from the historical record. No trial, no execution, no mention in any official documents. It was as if she had never existed. The authorities clearly understood that her story was too dangerous to be preserved, that future generations might draw uncomfortable conclusions about the legitimacy of government power. The cover-up extended beyond just hiding Marie Claire's fate. Entire aspects of the pre-revolutionary period were rewritten to minimize the role of rural tax fraud in generating revolutionary anger. The official narrative emphasized abstract philosophical principles, Enlightenment ideals about liberty and equality, while downplaying the more mundane reality that the revolution had been triggered by simple criminal activity on a massive scale. Even the revolutionaries themselves seemed eager to forget how the uprising had actually started. It was more inspiring to claim they were fighting for universal human rights than to admit they were responding to widespread tax fraud. The peasant girl who had exposed the corruption that made revolution inevitable was gradually erased from the story, replaced by more noble and philosophically satisfying explanations for why the French people had risen up against their government. But traces of the truth survived in unexpected places. Private letters, family records, local histories that were never incorporated into official accounts. These fragments paint a picture very different from the standard narrative of the French Revolution. They suggest that the uprising wasn't primarily driven by abstract political theory, but by the very practical realization that the royal government had been lying to and stealing from its own people for generations. Marie Claire's story also reveals something disturbing about how historical narratives are constructed. The people who write history are usually the same people who benefit from existing power structures. They have strong incentives to present revolutions as responses to philosophical disagreements, rather than as reactions to criminal activity by government officials. Acknowledging that the French Revolution began with the exposure of systematic fraud would raise uncomfortable questions about the legitimacy of all government taxation. The implications extend far beyond 18th century France. Marie Claire's discoveries highlighted a fundamental problem that exists in every society: the difficulty of maintaining accountability when those in power control the information that citizens receive about government activities. Her ability to read allowed her to uncover deceptions that had been hidden from illiterate peasants for decades. But how many similar deceptions remain hidden today, simply because ordinary people lack the knowledge or resources to investigate them? The technological parallels are striking. Just as literacy gave Marie Claire the power to challenge official narratives in her time, modern information technology gives ordinary citizens unprecedented ability to investigate government activities and corporate behavior. But just as the authorities in 18th century France tried to suppress literacy among the peasant classes, modern institutions often try to limit public access to information that might reveal uncomfortable truths about how power really operates. Marie Claire's story also demonstrates how individual actions can have consequences far beyond what anyone could predict. When she decided to learn to read, when she chose to examine the tax collector's documents, when she began sharing her discoveries with other villages, she had no idea she was setting in motion events that would reshape European civilization. Her modest goal was simply to protect her family and neighbors from fraud, but her actions ended up contributing to one of the most significant political transformations in human history. The French Revolution that began with Marie Claire's discoveries would eventually consume millions of lives, topple monarchies across Europe, inspire democratic movements around the world, and establish principles of popular sovereignty that continue to influence political systems today. All because one teenage peasant girl refused to accept that she couldn't understand the documents that governed her life. But perhaps the most important lesson from Marie Claire's story is about the power of literacy and critical thinking to challenge unjust systems. The ability to read and analyze official documents gave her the tools to expose fraud that had been hidden for generations. Her example suggests that education isn't just about personal advancement. It's about empowering people to hold their leaders accountable and demand honest government. The next time someone tells you that individual actions don't matter, that ordinary people can't change history, that complex political systems are too powerful for citizens to influence, remember Marie Claire Dubois and the tax documents that brought down the French monarchy. Because sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with grand philosophical pronouncements, but with someone asking simple questions about why things work the way they do. The authorities who tried to erase Marie Claire from history understood something that we often forget, that the most dangerous threat to corrupt power isn't organized opposition or violent resistance. It's the simple act of an ordinary person refusing to accept lies as truth. Her story reminds us that literacy, curiosity, and courage remain the most powerful weapons against injustice, even when those who benefit from the status quo would prefer that we never learn to use them. If stories about hidden historical truths and their contemporary relevance fascinate you, subscribe to The Gray Hour for more investigations into how ordinary people have shaped extraordinary events. Because sometimes the most important history is written by those whose names we're never taught to remember.